She smiled when she said it. "The light is better over here, sweetheart." She touched my arm like she was doing me a favor, guided me to the edge of the frame, the whole family in the center, shoulders touching, and me standing at the far left near the railing like an afterthought. She told the photographer where to stand for better light. The first time she saw my work, she called it extraordinary, said she'd never seen anyone handle light like that. She told 3 of her friends about my gallery that same week. The second time she saw me, I was standing in her foyer holding her son's hand, and she looked at my skin and said she was worried about what was practical for the children. Same woman, same eyes. She could see my art. She couldn't see me. And the worst part? She knew. She always knew. My name is Naomi Carter. I run a portrait studio out of Silver Spring, Maryland. My name is on the door. My face is on the website. I earned a BFA in photography from Howard University, trained in darkrooms, and I am not hiding from anybody. Korean families book me months out. I've been named Best Portrait Studio 2 years running. I specialize in making every skin tone luminous, which is rarer in this industry than it sounds, and it is the work that defines me. That portrait she cried at, the one she described to 3 friends, was mine. A Korean grandmother holding her newborn grandchild. 3 generations of hands in the frame. She saw it at a group show in Bethesda, before she ever knew I existed. She called it extraordinary and meant it. I know she meant it because later, when I finally met her, she described the quality of the light from memory. I have a daughter named Sola. She's 4 years old, mixed black and Korean, brown skin and dark curly hair and her father's eyes. She calls Park Yoon-suk Halmoni, with wide open love, the kind that doesn't know yet to protect itself. Every time, Yoon-suk picks her up, and something in her face softens for half a second before she catches herself. I have watched that catching herself more times than I can count. But that is later. We're starting at a dinner party in Columbia Heights, a Saturday night in late November, someone's apartment with not enough chairs, and someone's playlist trying hard in the background. My friend Camille had invited me. I was tired from a shoot that morning, planted near the bookshelf with a glass of wine, already calculating how soon I could leave without being rude. That's where Jun-ho found me. He came over carrying a drink and looked around the crowded room with the expression of a man who had made a social miscalculation. Then he looked at me. "I don't know anyone here," he said. Just like that. "I know 3 people," I said. He smiled. "So you're doing better than me." His name was Jun-ho Park. Urban planning, the kind of work that's unglamorous and essential and doesn't get talked about at parties, which I thought was interesting. He had an easy way of holding himself, not performing anything, just present. He asked what I did. "I'm a photographer," I said. "What do you photograph?" "Everything that deserves better light." He considered that. Not performatively, actually considered it. "That's most things," he said. "Most things, yeah." We talked for 2 hours. He had opinions about a documentary I'd seen and was wrong about the ending. I told him he was wrong. He wanted to know why. I explained. He pushed back. I pushed harder. He laughed. And it was a real laugh, the kind that doesn't come from politeness. He was careful with his words. He thought before he spoke. I'm the opposite. I speak first and think through talking, and usually that combination produces friction. With him, it produced something else. Like 2 different instruments playing different parts of the same song. He asked what I looked for in a subject. I told him I looked for the moment before a person realized they were being seen, because that was the moment the face did what it actually meant. He listened to that like it was a real answer, not a conversation piece. Then he said, "That sounds like patience." I said, "It's attention. They're different." He nodded, thought about it, didn't rush to agree or disagree. That was when I started actually paying attention to him. Around midnight, the party started thinning. We'd moved from the bookshelf to a corner by the window. Camille caught my eye across the room and raised an eyebrow. I looked away. When I said I should go, he said he'd walk with me to the metro. It was only 4 blocks. We walked slowly. At the entrance to the station, he stopped. "I had a good time," he said. "So did I." He got out his phone. I gave him my number. On the train home, I looked out the dark window and thought about nothing in particular. I wasn't planning anything. I wasn't hoping for anything. I was just a woman on a late train after a good conversation, and the city moved past outside the glass. He texted before I got home. Got back to the party, and it's even worse without someone to argue with. I smiled at my phone, typed back, That's what happens when you're wrong about documentaries. 3 dots. Then, call me tomorrow and explain it again. Slower this time. He called me first, actually. The next evening around 7, he had sent me an article about urban green space policy that morning with a note that said just, counter-argument. I had sent him back why the counter-argument was underdeveloped. He called to defend it. I dismantled the defense. He found a new angle. I found a better one. We got loud about it. We both laughed. Somewhere in there we stopped talking about the article. He told me a little about his family, just the shape of it. An older brother who'd gone into the family business and done everything right. A mother who had certain ideas about how things should be. He said it lightly, the way people do when the weight of something is too familiar to carry in the voice. He'd wanted to be an architect once, he said. His family had a different plan. He spent 2 years in a major he hated before he switched to urban planning, and the first day in the planning program, he walked out of a lecture and just stood on the sidewalk for a minute, breathing. It sounds like you had to find something that was yours, I said. Something like that, he said. Then, tell me about Howard. I told him the real version. The first week of Professor Ayanna Williams's intro course, when she made us photograph the same subject 20 times in different light and lined all 20 prints on the wall. She walked down the row without speaking. When she got to mine, she stopped, tapped one print and said, "This one. What did you see?" I saw how the afternoon light moved across her face, I told her. It was going to move away in about 30 seconds, so I had to decide. "And you decided?" Professor Williams said. I decided. She nodded and moved on. That was it. But something had been confirmed. Not that I was good, that I had an eye, that I could see light like it was talking to me, and I could answer back. I told him about the darkroom sessions until 2 in the morning, about the first time I really solved dark skin in low light and understood it wasn't a technical problem, it was an attention problem. You had to care enough to look. Most photographers didn't. I did. The first time I got it right, I sat down on the darkroom floor. I couldn't explain it then. I just sat down. "You made yourself undeniable," Junho said. "I had to be," I said. "Some of us do." A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause where something has landed and both people are letting it settle. "I want to see your work," he said. "It's on the website." "I know. I looked it up after you left the party." Something small moved in my chest. I let it. We talked until almost 11. When we finally said goodnight, there was a moment before I put the phone down where I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment. Sola asleep in the next room, the city doing its steady city thing outside the window. I thought about what he'd said, the way he'd received it, that story about the dark room, the floor, the light. He didn't make it romantic or symbolic. He just said, "You found something real." Like that was the whole thing. Like that was enough. He already wanted to talk the next day. I already knew I'd pick up. I didn't know yet what was coming from outside. I only knew what I felt right then, which was something simple and good, the kind of thing that hasn't yet been complicated by anything. The calls became a rhythm. He'd send an article. I'd send back why it was wrong. He'd call to defend it. We'd end up somewhere neither of us expected. A week in, he sent me a piece about gentrification in Prince George's County, the neighborhood I grew up in, and he did it with a little note that said just, "Disagree with the conclusion? Your call." I called him in 11 minutes. He was already laughing when he picked up. "You can't disagree with the conclusion without engaging the methodology," I said. "The methodology assumes displacement is uniformly negative. I think that's too simple." "It's too simple because you've never been the one displaced." Pause. Not defensive. He was thinking, the way he always did before he answered, and I was learning to read those pauses. This one meant he was taking me seriously. "You're right," he said. "Walk me through it." So I did. I told him about the street my parents lived on before the property taxes climbed, about the church that got sold to a developer when I was 15, about the particular ache of driving through a place that looks like progress to everyone, except the people who remember what was there. He listened. He didn't rush to respond. When I finished, he said, "That's what the article can't hold, the texture of it." "No article can hold it," I said. "That's why there's photography." A beat. Then, "Tell me about Howard." I'd mentioned Howard before, but lightly. This time, I told him more. The real version. I told him about the first week of Professor Williams's intro course. when she made us photograph the same subject 20 times in different light, and then line all 20 prints up on the wall. She walked down the row without speaking. When she got to my prints, she stopped, said nothing. For a long moment I thought I had failed at something. Then she tapped one of them and said, "This one. What did you see?" I saw how the afternoon light moved across her face, I told her. It was going to move away in about 30 seconds, so I had to decide. "And you decided," Professor Williams said. "I decided." She nodded and moved on down the wall. That was it. But I understood afterward that something had been confirmed. Not that I was good. That I had an eye. That I could see light like it was talking to me, and I could answer back. I told him about the darkroom sessions until 2 in the morning, the ones where I was chasing something I couldn't name. About the first time I really solved dark skin in low light and understood it wasn't a technical problem. It was an attention problem. You had to care enough to look. Most photographers didn't. I did. The first time I got it right, I sat down on the darkroom floor, I told him. I don't know why. I just sat down. "Because you'd found something real," Junho said. "Yeah, that's what it feels like," he said. "When you've been searching for something and you finally touch it, your body just goes." "When has that happened to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I wanted to be an architect. When I was in college, my family wanted me in the business. I spent 2 years in a major I hated before I switched to urban planning. The first day in the planning program, I walked out of a lecture on public transit infrastructure, and I just stood on the sidewalk for a minute breathing. It sounds stupid. It doesn't, I said. I'm not an architect. I'm not who I was supposed to be, but I'm doing work that matters and I chose it. That part I can't regret. I thought about that for a long time after we got off the phone. The cost of choosing yourself. The way it looked from the outside like a deviation and felt from the inside like the only honest move. We had been talking for 3 weeks when he said he wanted me to meet his family. He said it the same way he said everything, without ceremony. We were on the phone. He was describing a family dinner coming up that weekend, something about his mother making japchae, and then he said, "Come, I want you there." Something in my chest shifted. I said yes. I want to tell you about the night I met them so you understand what it was like before it changed. Junho drove. We parked in front of a house in Annandale on a Saturday evening in February. One of those older suburbs where the houses are close together and every yard has a persimmon tree if you know how to look. He knocked even though it was his parents' house. His mother opened the door. Park Yun-suk. She was smaller than I expected, compact and precise. The kind of woman who holds herself like she knows exactly how much space she takes up. She looked at me. Then something happened in her face, quick and unmistakable. Recognition. "Naomi Carter," she said. Not a question. I nodded. The portrait of the grandmother. She pressed her hand briefly to her chest. "I was at the Bethesda show. I cried. I told everyone." Junho looked between us. "You two have met?" "I was moved by her work," his mother said, almost to herself. Then she smiled, and it was genuine, the kind of smile that comes from unexpected pleasure. Come in. Come in. I have to show Mr. Park." The evening was warm in the way I hadn't expected. His father, a quiet man who carried his height carefully, and always seemed to be listening to something just out of range, shook my hand and said, "My wife has mentioned your photography." He said it with a small, genuine smile. His older brother Jaewon and Jaewon's wife Minyoung were there, and his sister Yuna, and a scattering of cousins who got introduced too quickly for me to hold all the names. But Yoon-suk. She took my coat. She brought me into the living room, and within 20 minutes, she had her phone out showing photographs of my work to her cousin. "Look what she does with light," she said. "This one, look at this one." She was not performing. She was proud. The way you're proud when you've discovered something and you get to share it. I sat on her sofa and ate japchae. That was better than any I'd ever had. And I watched Junho's mother show my portfolio to her family, and something in me felt something I had not expected. Seen. She saw the work. She saw it fully, clearly, with the eye of someone who had genuinely looked. And she was sharing it with her family, like it was a gift she'd found and couldn't keep to herself. It was real. I need you to understand that it was real. I held on to that. What we had, Junho and I, kept getting sharper. He had a habit of sending me articles at strange hours with notes that were never more than 3 words. I'd respond at length. He'd call. We'd argue. We'd go somewhere else. We started spending Saturday afternoons together. Walking through neighborhoods, he was mapping for a transit proposal, me with a camera because I don't know how to be anywhere without one. We talked about everything and nothing. He was careful, and I was not. And somehow that produced the best conversations I'd ever had. He pushed back on me in ways that required me to think harder, and that's not nothing. One Saturday, we sat on a bench in Meridian Hill Park and argued about documentary ethics for an hour, and then he went quiet. And when I looked over at him, he was watching me with an expression I didn't have a word for. "Are you even listening to me?" I said. "I'm listening to everything," he said. "I just also like watching you when you're right about something. You get this look." "What look?" "Like you're not performing conviction. You just have it." I looked away. The fountain moved. A kid ran past with a red balloon. I didn't say anything for a moment because there wasn't anything that needed saying. We were good at that too. The quiet. One evening, early in spring, we were walking back to his car after dinner, and he reached over and took my hand. No announcement, no ceremony, just his hand around mine, warm and steady, like it was something that had already been decided. I kept walking. He kept walking. We didn't talk about it, but I noticed everything. It was around this time, as the weather started shifting towards spring, and Sola had taken to leaving toy dinosaurs on the counter as a territory claim, that the talk about the future started. Not between me and Junho, between Junho and his mother. I didn't hear those conversations. I only know what he told me afterward, and even that he told me in pieces carefully, the way he gave me information he knew would land hard. She had started asking questions about the relationship, about where it was going, whether he was serious, what the plan was. He was serious. The plan was something. I understood later that this was the hinge, the relationship becoming real, the future becoming concrete. These things changed the temperature of something for her. Not visibly, not yet. But later, I would look back at the timing of everything and understand that it started here. The last dinner of March was still good. Yoon-suk made her mother's recipe for doenjang jjigae. She showed me how she fermented the paste herself. She talked about Naomi Carter portraits like she was the one who had discovered it. Her cousin's daughter was getting married in the fall, and Yoon-suk mentioned my name, said I was the one to call. But then, April came in cold, and I noticed it the way you notice a draft before you can find the window. The warmth was still there, but it had a condition in it now. Something I couldn't name yet but could feel, the way you can feel a change in barometric pressure in your knees before the rain comes. Yoon-suk still talked about my work. She had stopped talking about me. It was the smallest thing. The kind of thing that makes you wonder if you're imagining it. At a family dinner in late April, she praised a portrait I had taken of a client whose daughter had come back from a trip to Seoul. "Isn't the lighting extraordinary?" she said. She was talking to her cousin. She was talking about my work. She wasn't talking to me. She had gone from showing my portfolio directly to people with her hand on my arm, "Here, look what she does," to talking about the work like it existed independently, like it had no photographer attached. I noticed. I didn't say anything yet. I noticed and I turned it over, the way you turn a stone in your hand, examining the weight of it. At a family gathering in May, when Junho and his mother were in the kitchen together and I was in the living room with Sola on my lap, looking at her dinosaur book, I heard Yoon-suk say, "She's very talented, of course. But have you thought about what's practical?" Junho's voice was low. I couldn't hear the words, just the shape of them. Defensive. Yoon-suk, clearly. "I'm not saying anything against her. I'm saying Korean society is, well, you know how it is. I just want you to think about it." The dinosaur on the page was a stegosaurus. Sola said its name carefully, getting the syllables right. I agreed that it was a stegosaurus. I kept my face very still. She was talented. But that butt was the size of something enormous. I knew exactly what was inside it. And I sat there on the sofa with my daughter in my lap, and I understood that the warmth I had been sitting in had just become something different. It had become conditional. At dinner that night, Yoon-suk served me a generous portion and asked about my current projects, with what sounded like genuine interest. She mentioned the wedding portfolio to her cousin again. She smiled at me twice. She did all of this, and none of it touched the butt that was still hanging in the kitchen air. I watched her. I watched the work of it, the careful maintenance of warmth around a cold thing, and I thought, she is very good at this. And I thought, this is going to cost me something. The drive home was quiet. Sola had fallen asleep in the back seat. Junho kept both hands on the wheel. She asked me what was practical, I said. He said nothing for a moment. Then, she worries. About what? About, I don't know, the future. What things look like. What I look like, I said. His jaw tightened. Junho. She's not trying to. He stopped, started again. She's had a particular idea of how things should go, her whole life. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds. How does it sound? He didn't answer. Outside the window, the highway signs lit up and disappeared. I know what she means, I said. I'm saying, do you? He looked at me briefly, back to the road. I know, he said. Very quiet. Dinner stopped being warm after that. It was something I had to manage now, something I brought myself to rather than relaxing into. I kept going because I loved him, because Sola adored those gatherings, because the cousins were kind, and Jaewon's wife Minyoung had a dry wit that made me laugh. I kept going, and I watched. Yoon-suk kept praising the work. She stopped praising me. It was surgical in its precision. At a family birthday in June, she told Minyoung's mother about a portrait series I'd done for a Korean community center. She described it with accuracy and warmth. She did not introduce me to Minyoung's mother. I was in the room. She did not introduce me. I went still inside, the way I go still when I'm figuring something out. At dinner, she talked about the wedding photography inquiry like it was a professional recommendation she was making. I've been telling people about Naomi Carter portraits for months, she said to the table, to no one in particular. She said my studio name. She did not look at me. I thought about Professor Williams, about what she said about erasure. That Sunday, Junho was watching me from across his parents' living room the way he sometimes did. That specific watching, and I looked back. He started toward me. His mother called him from the kitchen. He went. That was the architecture of it. He always went. After dinner, driving home again, I said, She's doing something. I know, he said, which surprised me. She doesn't introduce me when she talks about my work. She talks about the studio like it's a business card she's distributing and not a person she knows. I know. And you sit there. He turned onto our street. Quiet. I tried again. When she does it, I need you to do something. I hear you, he said. That was not the same thing. The following Saturday we had dinner with his family again, and Yoon-suk mentioned my portfolio to a family friend who had come from Fairfax, and she did it without looking at me, and Junho was right there, and he sat in his chair and let it happen. I watched him not do anything, his hands around his glass, his face attentive, his silence perfect and absolute. After, in the hallway putting on my coat, I took a breath, and then I said to Yoon-suk directly, pleasantly, the way you can say something sharp and keep your voice completely level. It's nice to finally be introduced properly to the people you've been telling about my work. The air changed. Yoon-suk looked at me. Something moved in her face that was not quite embarrassment and not quite irritation. She smiled. Of course, she said. Of course. This is Naomi, Junho's girlfriend. She said it smoothly. She recovered fast. The friend smiled and shook my hand. Junho's hand found the small of my back, warm and present. The first time all evening he'd done anything like that. In the car, he said, You could have let me handle it? You weren't handling it? I was going to. When? I kept my voice even. After she'd recommended my studio to everyone at the table without once looking at me? Naomi. There was something exhausted in his voice. You're making it worse. I'm making it visible, I said. It was always there. He didn't say anything to that. And I think it was because he knew I was right and didn't have a counter, not a real one, only the old desire for things to settle back to the way they were before anyone named what they were. That's not the same as me being wrong. That silence between us was the first one that felt like something other than thinking. Sola drew the portrait on a Wednesday afternoon. 3 weeks later, she had been at a family gathering that Sunday. She had spent the afternoon with the Korean cousins playing some game involving a cardboard box and a stuffed rabbit that none of the adults understood. She had sat in Halmoni's lap during dessert. She had called Halmoni with that open, uncomplicated love that only 4-year-olds have access to, the kind that doesn't know to protect itself yet. Wednesday, she came home from preschool with the drawing in her backpack. She put it on the kitchen table like she was presenting evidence. It was done in crayon, 6 figures, all roughly the same height, all given the same careful circle heads and stick body sincerity. She had labeled them in her approximate spelling, Mommy, Daddy, Sola, Halmani, Uncle Jay, Minyoung. The colors were approximate and joyful. Nobody matched their actual skin tones exactly, but nobody was left out. They were all the same size. They were all in the center of the page. Nobody was at the edge. I stood at the kitchen table and looked at that drawing for a long time. Sola had already moved on, was already asking about a snack, was already at the refrigerator rattling something. I stood there. My daughter had drawn the family she lived in. She had included everyone. She didn't know yet that some people thought she was supposed to exclude anyone. She didn't know yet about the but. She didn't know about the kitchen conversation or the careful avoidance, or the way a woman could recommend your work to a room full of people while refusing to let you exist in that room as a person. She just drew everyone. I thought about what it would cost her to find out. Not now, later. When she was old enough to notice the catch in the warmth, the calculation behind the smile, the careful way some people love you from a distance they've decided is appropriate. When she looked at family photos and noticed, slowly, and then all at once, where she always ended up in the frame, something settled in my chest, heavy and clear. Not anger, not yet. Just the weight of knowing exactly what was at stake. I picked up the drawing and put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Sola had already forgotten it. I didn't. That same week, Minyoung texted me. I had her number from a family gathering months ago. We had traded numbers because she'd asked about booking a family session. We had a genuine warmth between us. But this text was different. Short, deliberate. I heard what happened at dinner last week. I think your work is beautiful, and I think Yoon-suk is wrong. I read it twice. Then I typed back, thank you. Kept it. That text cracked something open in the way it was framed. Not the support, though that mattered. It was the precision of wrong. Not complicated, not understandable in context, not a product of different generational values. Wrong. Minyoung was Korean. She was the daughter-in-law who had done everything Yoon-suk approved of. She was inside the circle, and she was telling me, from inside that circle, that this was a choice, that it was one woman's choice, not Korean families, not cultural inevitability, not something woven into the fabric of how things were, and therefore unanswerable. One woman, one set of decisions, a door Yoon-suk was choosing to close. That matters. When you're in the middle of something like this, when the hostility is wrapped in concern and the rejection is wrapped in cultural tradition, you can start to believe that the wall is load-bearing, that it holds everything up, that removing it would collapse the structure. Minyoung's text was a message from inside the wall. It said, this wall is optional. Some people chose not to build it. I felt myself become clearer. The whitening cream arrived in July. Yoon-suk brought it to a family gathering in a small paper shopping bag, the kind with rope handles that nice stores use. She presented it to me with warmth, with the same warmth she used to bring out for my work. She said she had been in a Korean beauty supply shop and thought of me. She named the brand. She said Korean women swore by it. She said the skincare tradition in Korea was extraordinary, thousands of years of knowledge in a single bottle, and she thought I might appreciate it. She handed it to me. I held it. I looked at the label. I put it in my bag. I smiled. I said thank you. Jun-ho was across the room talking to his brother. He did not see. Later that night, in his car, I told him what had happened. His face went very still. The stillness he had when he was working something out. She thought you'd like it, he said. Korean skincare is a real thing. She wasn't trying to. Jun-ho. She probably just thought it was a nice gift. Jun-ho. My voice was very even. Whitening cream. She gave me whitening cream. Look at me and tell me she didn't know exactly what she was doing? He didn't look at me. He looked at the road. I'm not saying it's okay, he finally said. I'm saying, I don't know if she knows what she means. She knows, I said. The woman who cried at my portrait knows exactly what light does. She doesn't make mistakes about what she's looking at. Silence. She's going to keep doing things like this, I said. Until you say something. He turned onto my street. Parked. Engine off. I'll talk to her, he said. He said it the way you say something when you need the conversation to stop. The photo positioning started the same month. At a 4th of July gathering, while everyone was assembling for the family photo on the back porch, Eun-suk touched my arm and guided me gently to the left, to the edge of the group near the far post. The light is best there, she said quietly, just to me. You'll photograph better there. She said it to me. The photographer. She told the photographer where to stand for better light. I stood where she put me. I looked at the arrangement. Junho in the center with his brother, his parents flanking them, the cousins arranged in a semicircle, and me at the far left, one step removed, technically in the frame. The cousin's teenage daughter took the photo on her phone. It was fine. I was in it. Barely. I thought about Sola's drawing. Everyone in the center, same size, no edges. I thought about what Professor Williams said about light being political. Who you light and how you light them is a statement. Where you put people in the frame is a statement too. I didn't move back to the center. I wasn't ready for that fight yet, but I filed it. I filed it the way I file everything I know I'm going to need later. The days between the gatherings, Junho and I were still good. More than good. The conversations kept going deeper. He had started bringing documents from his transit project to dinner sometimes, and I'd look them over not because I understood urban planning, but because I understood how you argue for something, how you build a case, and sometimes he needed a sounding board who would tell him where the argument was weak. I did that. He listened. He'd push back. I'd sharpen my point. He'd sharpen his response, and we'd end up somewhere neither of us had started. One Tuesday evening, we were at his apartment, sitting on his floor with the transit map spread between us, and he was making a case for a bus rapid transit corridor, and I was showing him where his own data undermined his preferred conclusion, and he leaned back and looked at me with that expression I still couldn't fully name. "What?" I said. "Nothing," he smiled. "You're doing the look again. Stop watching me when I'm working." "I'll try," he said, and didn't. It was good. That part was good. I want you to hold on to that. The texture of what was good, so that when everything started pressing in from outside, you understand what was being threatened. This was a man who read things to argue with me. This was a man who thought before he spoke and took me seriously when I did. This was a man who held my hand without announcement, who was present without performing it, who laughed like he meant it. The love was real. The complication was also real, and they were both happening at the same time, pulling in opposite directions, and I was living in the middle of both of them. The last week of July, his parents had a small gathering, just family, and I noticed the cream was not in my bag anymore. I had left it on my counter at home as a reminder I could see every morning, a small documentation. At the gathering, I took Sola to the bathroom, and when I came back, Yoon Suk had moved the chair where I had been sitting to the other side of the table. She was setting out dishes. She didn't acknowledge the chair had moved. I sat in it anyway. The new position was at the end of the table, slightly separated from the main cluster. For the lighting, presumably. On the drive home, Sola fell asleep again, her head tipped against the window, her small hand still curled around a toy she'd gotten from one of the cousins. I watched her in the rearview mirror. The city moved past her face. "It's both at once," I said. Junho glanced over. "What is?" "This. You and me. And that." I didn't explain more than that. I didn't need to. He knew what I meant. He reached over and put his hand on mine on the center console. Warm, steady, the same way he'd taken my hand that first time in April. "I know," he said. And then he didn't say anything else. Just kept his hand there, and I let him, because it was both things at once. It was real, and it was insufficient, and I didn't have a way to separate them yet. Maybe you can't separate them. Maybe love is always exactly this. Something true running alongside something that hurts, and you have to decide which one you trust more when they start running in opposite directions. A Friday in August. Rain. He picked me up at 7. We were supposed to go to dinner, but the rain was heavy, and we ended up parked outside my building for 20 minutes, listening to it hit the windshield, neither of us moving to go in. I had been thinking all week about the chair, about the cream, about the photos, and the careful positioning and the praise that went to the studio name while I sat a few feet away, being not quite introduced, not quite seen. I had been thinking about what Junho's silence cost me, about the gap between I know and I will do something, how you can fall into that gap and stay there a long time if you're careful enough. "She moved my chair," I said. He didn't ask which chair. He knew. "She moved it when I was in the bathroom. While we were at dinner." He was quiet. "And you say I'm making it worse," I said. "You said that to me. In June you told me I was making it worse." "Naomi?" "No. I want to know." My voice was even. I had spent years learning to keep my voice even when I was most furious. Not to hide the fury, but because precision matters more than volume when you're trying to be heard. I want to know what exactly I'm making worse. She recommends my studio to strangers without introducing me. She gives me whitening cream. She moves my chair. She puts me at the edge of every photo. What exactly am I making worse by saying something? What was there before that I'm ruining? The rain moved across the windshield. He was very still. I'm not asking you to be silent, he said finally. I'm asking you to let me handle it. You've been handling it for 3 months. I need more time. She doesn't give me more time, I said. She doesn't pause the chair moving while you figure out your timeline. He turned toward me slightly. His face in the low light was tired in a way I recognized. Not the tired of someone who didn't care. The tired of someone holding something very heavy with both hands and running out of room. I'm not asking you to be less, he said. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to let me catch up. I looked at him. The rain was very loud. Catch up to what? I said. To you, he said it simply. To the way you move through this. You know exactly what's happening and exactly what you're doing, and I'm still trying to figure out how to have a conversation with my mother that I have never in my entire life been able to have. That's what I'm asking for. Time to figure out how to do something I've never done. The rain moved. Something in my chest was very tight. Not anger. Something closer to the way you feel when someone surprises you with a truth you didn't expect. A true thing that complicates your clean position. I know how to fight back, I said. You know how to disappear. And right now, from where I'm sitting, your disappearing is the thing she's counting on. He didn't argue with that. Neither of us had a clean answer. We just sat there in the rain, not ready to go inside, not ready to leave, both holding the weight of something that was true from at least 2 directions. The streetlight through the rain made everything soft and blurred. His profile, my hands in my lap, the space between us that was not a distance, but a difficulty. Neither of us wanted to go. I'm not going anywhere, he said. It was the quietest he'd said anything all night. I know, I said. We sat there a little longer. The rain kept coming down. His hand was still on the console, not reaching for mine this time, just present, just there. I looked at him. He looked at me, and the space between us tightened to something I didn't have a name for yet. Something that wasn't the argument anymore, but was also not the resolution of it. Something in the territory between a fight and a kiss, where everything is very still and very certain, and nobody moves first, because moving first would mean something neither of us was ready to say out loud. The rain was loud. His eyes didn't move. I reached for the door handle. Don't, he said. I didn't. The rain kept coming down. I had my hand on the door handle, and he had said don't, and I hadn't moved, and now neither of us was moving, and the only sound was the rain hitting the roof of his car in that steady, indifferent way rain has when it isn't trying to be anything. He was still looking at me. I was still looking at him. This is the thing nobody tells you about the moments right before the important things. There's no music. There's no soft focus. There's just a woman with her hand on a door handle and a man who said one word and meant more than one thing, and the two of them sitting in the specific silence of people who have just told each other the most honest things they've said yet and don't know what to do with all that honesty. I let go of the door handle. He exhaled once, very quiet, and then he reached over and took my face in both his hands, and he kissed me. Not tentative, not asking permission. The kiss of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and understands that the right moment is the one where you stop waiting. The argument was still in it, still somewhere underneath. The weight of everything we'd said and not said still there, but so was everything else. The 3-hour phone calls, the transit maps on his floor, the hand taken without ceremony in April, the way he looked at me when I was right about something. All of it was in the kiss. That's the only way I know how to describe it. We weren't kissing to escape what we'd been talking about. We were kissing because we'd rather fight with each other than agree with anyone else. And this was what fighting with each other looked like when you ran out of words and only had the truth left. His hands on my face. My hands finding the front of his jacket. The rain on the windshield, outside, irrelevant. When we finally pulled back, we were both quiet for a moment. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. That was all. He drove me to my door and walked me up, and we said goodnight, in the way you say goodnight when something has shifted and you are both very aware of the shift, but not ready to name it yet. I went inside. Sola was asleep. her small body curled around a stuffed panda. I stood in the doorway of her room for a moment and watched her breathe. Okay. What came after was the ordinary, which was its own kind of gift. Not the ordinary of before, where things were mostly good and slightly complicated. The ordinary of two people who have kissed in the rain after a real argument and know something now that they didn't know before. A different ordinary. One that has his Sunday morning voice in it, and Sola's cartoons, and the particular quality of light through a kitchen window at 9 in the morning when nobody is performing anything. He had a ritual of reading the news on his phone at the kitchen table while coffee finished brewing. He didn't change it. I started drinking his coffee, which was stronger than I would have made it, and I didn't change that either. We found a rhythm the way two careful people find rhythms, which is to say slowly and then all at once, without either of them exactly deciding to. Sola loved his apartment. She loved the small balcony where he had inexplicably potted 4 types of herbs. She loved that he would watch whatever she was watching on television without complaint, which at that phase of her life was a show about small bears who solved mild mysteries involving baked goods. He watched it with the same attentive expression he brought to everything. She found this deeply appropriate. So did I. One Sunday in October, she was in the living room watching the bears, and I was making coffee, and he was at the kitchen table with his phone, and the light through the window was doing nothing special. Gray-white morning light. The kind of light that doesn't ask anything of you. He put his phone face down on the table. "I love you," he said. Not to the phone, not to the room, to me. The way he said it was what stopped me. Not the words, because I had been carrying the feeling for a while, turning it over, being careful with it the way you're careful with things that matter. It was the way he said it, like he was reporting something, like he had just noticed the fact of it, and was telling me the way you might tell someone it had started raining. Simple and entirely sure of itself. I almost dropped the mug. I set it down on the counter instead. "Say that again," I said. He looked up. There was something in his face that was not performance. Just a man sitting at a table who had just said the most honest thing with the particular quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to prove about it. "I love you," he said. Something moved through my chest. Warm and complicated and very certain. My eyes went wet. "Took you long enough," I said. He smiled, reached across the table for my hand. I gave it to him. In the living room, one of the bears was explaining something important about blueberry scones. Sola approved. "I need to tell you about the phone call. I've been putting it off, even here, even telling it to you now, because there's a particular quality to the moment you understand something you were already half knowing. It's not a shock. It's a door you were standing in front of and then it closes. Quietly, finally, and you hear the click and understand that it had been closing for a long time, and you'd been hoping it would stop." It was a Tuesday evening in November, 3 weeks after the Sunday morning in the kitchen. I was at Yoon Suk's house picking up Sola, who had spent the afternoon there, while Jun-ho and I were both working. She picked Sola up on Tuesday afternoon sometimes. She had been doing this since spring. It was one of the places where her love for her granddaughter was genuine and uncomplicated, and I had held on to that. It was something. I arrived, and Sola was in the living room with a set of blocks, happily constructing something architectural. Yoon Suk was in the kitchen, her voice low and warm. She was on the phone. I heard her through the kitchen doorway. She didn't know I was there. "The photographer?" "Yes, she's very good. Talented girl. Jun-ho has good taste in that way." A pause. A small laugh. "But for a daughter-in-law?" She trailed off. Let the sentence end in the air. Then she laughed again, softer. "You understand?" I stood there. "You understand?" No additional words needed. No clarification required. Just, "You understand?" The whole explanation contained in the assumption that the other person, of course, would already know what went without saying. 2 women of a certain age and a certain community, on the phone on a Tuesday evening, having a conversation they would never need to finish out loud. "You understand?" I understood. She came out of the kitchen still smiling at something from the conversation and found me standing in the hallway. The smile didn't disappear exactly. It recalibrated, became the warm, gracious version she kept ready. "Naomi? I didn't hear you come in. Sola has been wonderful. We made yuja tea together." "Thank you," I said. My voice was fine. I had learned a long time ago how to keep my voice fine. I got Sola's coat on. I kissed her head. I said goodbye to Yunsuk with the warmth I had trained into the moment, and walked to my car and buckled Sola into her car seat, and then sat in the driver's seat for a long moment with my hands on the wheel. Talented girl. But for a daughter-in-law. This is what I understood, sitting in that car. She would praise my work forever. She would recommend my studio, tell her friends, bring it up at dinner like a card she was proud to hold. The art she would always keep. She had separated it off, put it in a room by itself, where it could stay clean and admired. And the woman who made the art, the person who stood at galleries and weddings and family dinners and kitchen tables, that person she would not take into the other room. That door she would quietly and permanently close. The artist, the woman, 2 rooms, no connecting door. She was not going to change her mind. What I had been doing, these months, the confronting and the naming and the holding my ground, none of it had moved her. She had heard it all, and it had passed through her like water through something solid. Because she was not operating from ignorance. She had all the information. She had made her decision, and she would keep making it, every Tuesday and Sunday and family holiday, in the elegant and untouchable way of people who have decided their reasons are reasons enough. I drove home. Sola talked about the blocks. I answered in the right places. That night I told Junho what I'd heard. He didn't say anything immediately. He sat with it the way he sat with things, not rushing to a response. And I watched his jaw work once, twice, that tightening that meant something was happening inside him that he hadn't sorted yet. She was on the phone, he finally said. Yes. Did she know you were there? No. He was quiet again. I waited. I'd learned to wait out his pauses. Not this time. Not for this one. She said she understood, I said. She didn't have to finish the sentence. The person she was talking to already knew what was inside it. Because it's not a complicated thought, Junho. It's the simplest possible thought. Talented photographer. Not the right skin for the family. That's the whole sentence. That's all that's in there. I know, he said. Stop saying I know as a way of ending conversations, I said. The precision in my voice had edges. I didn't smooth them. Knowing isn't doing. You have known for months. What I need is different from knowing. He looked at me. Something moved across his face. I'll talk to her, he said. You've said that before. I mean it. I know you mean it, I said. I just need to know whether you're going to do it before she decides for both of you. He didn't answer that. He never answered the questions that required a timeline. That was his pattern. The avoidance of the specific. The staying in the general. The I know and I will that never resolved into when. I went home that night, still carrying the weight of the phone call. I thought about the woman at the gallery. The one who cried. The one who told 3 friends. I had liked her. I had genuinely liked the person who saw my portrait of a Korean grandmother holding her grandchild and felt something true enough to tell people about. That woman was still in there somewhere. That was almost the hardest part. She wasn't a lie. She was real. And she was also the woman who had laughed on the phone on a Tuesday evening and let the sentence end in the space where the real reason lived. Both things were true. I didn't know what to do with both things being true. 3 weeks later, Junho's family had dinner together on a Sunday, and I watched him. I had asked him to say something. He had said he would. And I watched him sit across the table from his mother as she steered the conversation the way she always did, filling it with news from her community, updates on Jaewon's projects, questions for the cousins, and he sat there, hands around his glass, face attentive, entirely quiet. She said something about a wedding she had attended. She mentioned the photographer, someone other than me, with easy warmth. I was sitting right there. He said nothing. I watched him not speak. On the drive home I said, very quietly, "You were going to say something." He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. Not in front of everyone. You don't have to announce it. You just have to not sit there like a statue while she talks about someone else's photographer with me in the room. Naomi? You know it's not about the photographer. I know. That word again. I'm not asking you to fight her, I said. I'm asking you to exist in the same room as the problem. I'm working on it. While you work on it, I said, I'm the one sitting at the edge of the table. That was the start of the weeks that followed. They happened the way bad periods do. Not in a single scene, but in a series of small ones that accumulate into something you can't undo. He sat silent at another dinner. I confronted him afterward and he called me exhausting. I named his silence again, and he said he needed time. I told him, Time was a luxury he was spending with my dignity as collateral. He said I was catastrophizing. I said I was documenting. Each conversation ended somewhere worse than it started. We weren't fighting the same fight anymore. We were fighting the fight underneath the fight, the one about who we were to each other and whether what we needed from each other was something the other person could actually give. "You treat every dinner like a war zone," he said one night. November, late, his apartment. Both of us standing, neither sitting down, which was its own kind of statement. "Because it is one," I said. "You just refuse to be in it with me. I'm trying to preserve something. I am actively trying not to lose my family. And I'm actively trying not to lose myself." I kept my voice level. I kept it level because that was the only way to say the true thing and have it land instead of just explode. "What is the difference to you, Jun-ho? What is the actual difference between your mother and me? You can't say you love us both the same way when one of us is who she accepts, and one of us is who she's tolerating until you come to your senses. She doesn't think of it like that." "How does she think of it?" He didn't answer. "She thinks of it," I said, "as a practical question. I've heard her. In her kitchen, on her phone. She thinks I'm the wrong answer to a practical question, and every time you sit at that table and say nothing, you're agreeing with her. I'm not agreeing with her. Your silence is what she's counting on," I said. "She doesn't need you to say yes. She just needs you to not say no, and you keep giving her that." The silence between us was large. The specific large silence of two people who are both right about something and cannot agree on what to do about it. "You want me to blow up my family," he said. "I want you to tell your mother she doesn't get to erase me," I said. "I want that to be something you're willing to do, not a favor. Not when you get around to it. I want to know that you see what I see. When you look at what's happening, I see it. Then do something about it. I need space to figure out how to do it the right way." The right way. I had heard variations of this before. The right time, the right approach, the right conversation, the right moment. They were not wrong exactly. He wasn't wrong about the care required. But they were also always a reason not to do it today. "Space is what you always call it," I said, "when you need space to figure things out. But space is just disappearing with better language." Something crossed his face. Not anger. Something more tired than anger. "Maybe I do need to disappear for a minute," he said. "Maybe I need to not be in this argument for a second, with you or anyone, and just think." "Then go think," I said. My voice came out very quiet. "But don't call it something else." He left. And I stood in the middle of my apartment with the particular stillness of someone who has just watched a door close and isn't sure yet whether it will open again. Sola was asleep. The apartment was quiet. I thought about the phone call. I thought about the car in the rain. I thought about him saying "I love you," like he'd just noticed it was true, and how sure that had felt. How uncomplicated. I understood his silence. That was the part nobody tells you about the hard ones. It's much harder to hold ground against something you understand than against something you don't. I understood exactly why he sat quiet at that table. I understood the cost of the conversation he hadn't yet had, and it still wasn't enough. Understanding why wasn't the same as being able to keep absorbing it. We were both right. We were both doing the only things we knew how to do. His avoidance, my confrontation, incompatible responses to the same problem. Neither of us was the villain of this. There was just two people who loved each other and couldn't agree on what love required, and who had now run their patterns to their logical ends. He needed space to disappear into. I called it what it was. Sola's crayon drawing was on the refrigerator. Everyone in it. Everyone the same size. Nobody at the edge. I didn't know yet if this was something you could come back from. I sat with not knowing. He didn't come back that night. He didn't come back the next day either. There was no call, no text, no knock at my door. Just the particular silence of a man who had learned very young that distance was easier than the conversation, and who had spent his whole life getting better at it. I sat with that for a while. Then I got up and went to work. That's the part I need you to understand about who I am. The relationship cracked. It cracked the way I had always suspected it might, along the same fault line I'd watched forming for months. His avoidance and my confrontation finding the place where they couldn't coexist anymore. And it hurt. I want to be honest with you about that. It hurt in the specific deep way that things hurt when you understand exactly why they happened, and the understanding doesn't make them hurt any less. But I am Naomi Carter. I have a studio in Silver Spring with my name on the door. I have clients with sessions booked through April. And I was trained at Howard University by a woman who told me, very clearly, that who you show up as is a statement. Make yours. I made mine. I did not go to my parents' house in PG County looking for comfort. My mother would have listened, and my father would have asked if I was eating and sleeping, and both of those things would have been exactly what they were, which is good parents doing what good parents do. But I wasn't looking for comfort. I wasn't looking to be held until I felt better. I was looking to keep being myself, and I already knew how to do that. I went to my studio, a Tuesday family portrait, a Thursday headshot session, a Saturday wedding consultation I'd booked in August, normal work, the ordinary business of a woman who photographs people for a living and is very good at it. This is what I found out during those weeks. My work doesn't need my relationship to be intact. It never did. That was the thing about what I'd built. The credentials, the training, the years of darkroom hours and Professor Williams's voice telling me not to flatten what was in front of me. That was mine. Not mine because someone gave it to me. Mine because I had gone and gotten it with both hands, and it lived in me. Not in any apartment, or relationship, or family dinner table. I kept working. Sola was steady. She is always steady, this child, in the way of small people who don't yet understand that steadiness is something adults have to fight for. She watched her bears solve mysteries. She drew. She asked me once where Appa was, and I told her he was figuring some things out, and she accepted this with the particular equanimity of a 4-year-old and went back to her drawing. I watched her sometimes when I thought she couldn't see me, looking at the way her face worked when she was concentrating, the small serious furrow of her brow. She didn't know there was anything to worry about. I tried to keep it that way. 3 weeks into the separation, I had a booking I'd taken in September, a Korean grandmother and her 3 grandchildren, holiday portraits for Seolol. She had found me the way most Korean clients found me, through word of mouth, someone's cousin who had booked me the previous year. Her name was Mrs. Choi. She arrived with the 3 children in matching outfits, which is a thing Korean families do for holiday portraits, and the children were various degrees of patient, which is a thing children do regardless of the occasion. The grandchildren were mixed, half Korean and half something else I didn't ask about, and they ranged in age from somewhere around 3 to somewhere around 8, and they had between them the full range of skin tones that a family like that produces, lighter and darker, and every variation. And Mrs. Choi looked at them all with the particular, uncomplicated warmth of someone who does not notice the difference or does not care about it. She fussed over each one equally. She straightened the collar of the youngest one. She smoothed the hair of the middle one. She adjusted the older one's jacket, with the careful attention of a woman who has been straightening collars for 60 years and intends to keep doing it. Then she looked at me. "Make sure you get all of them," she said. "All of them the same." I positioned my camera. I looked through the lens. She was in the center. Each grandchild was close to her, not at the edge, not framed out, not positioned for better lighting. She had her arms arranged so that all 3 of them were inside the frame of her hold. She was looking at the camera with the expression of a woman who understood this was documentation, that this mattered, that every person in this picture deserved to be in this picture. I took the photo. I looked at the screen, a Korean grandmother who puts every grandchild in the frame. I stood there for a moment. Just a moment. The children were already beginning to wriggle, the youngest making sounds that indicated imminent departure from the pose, and Mrs. Choi was already murmuring to them in Korean, keeping them settled. I had one thought. So it is possible. Not a speech, not a revelation, not a parent's wise voice or a friend's phone call or an art series born from pain, just my own trained eye, doing what it was trained to do, seeing what was in front of it. The problem was not Korean families, the problem was this Korean family, and I knew what I was worth, and I was not moving. I finished the session. I edited the photos that evening, the usual work of color grading and cropping, the careful attention to how the light sat on each face. Then, I posted one to my studio account, the way I posted all client work, a normal caption, Mrs. Choi and family, holiday portraits, Naomi Carter portraits. I tagged the location. I included the booking link. Routine, ordinary. Just another Tuesday in the life of a photographer who is very good at her job. I didn't know he would see it. He saw it. He told me later that he'd been at his apartment, which he had retreated to fully now, alone with the specific discomfort of a man who has done the thing his whole pattern trained him to do, and knows it. He wasn't comfortable. He was doing what he'd always done, which was to stay away until the thing resolved itself. And the thing wasn't resolving itself, and he was beginning to understand why. He was on his phone. He was scrolling through nothing in particular, the aimless consumption of a person avoiding their own thoughts. And then there was my photo. Mrs. Choi, her 3 grandchildren, all of them in the center. He stared at it. He told me later that it was the clearest thing he'd felt in weeks. Not complicated, not requiring analysis. Just, his mother does not do that. His mother positions, his mother edges. His mother reaches for reasons why the frame needs to be this way for the lighting. And the frame comes out with one person at the edge, or one person cut to the shoulder, or one person, always the same person, at the margin of what gets kept. And here was Naomi Carter, 3 weeks into the separation, photographing a Korean grandmother who put every grandchild in the center, all of them the same, because that was who the grandmother was. Naomi had not collapsed. She had not run somewhere to heal. She had not made a project out of her pain or a statement out of her work. She had just kept working because she was Naomi Carter, and she kept working. Not despite the separation. Not as a response to it. Just because that was who she was. He understood something then. She didn't need him to be whole. She was whole. She had always been whole. And he would lose her, not because she had fallen apart without him, but because she had not. She would keep being excellent and clear and full of herself in the best possible way. And he would keep disappearing. And one day, the distance would be permanent. Not because she had decided it, but because he had chosen it over and over again by default. He was not going to let that happen. There was one conversation he had been avoiding his entire life. He went to his mother's house. I wasn't there for this part. I learned it afterward, the way you learn the things that happened in rooms you weren't in, from the person who was there. He told me everything he said. Every word. He didn't have to. He told me because he wanted me to have it, to hold on to it, to know that he had said it, not because he thought I needed him to, but because he needed to have said it, for himself, for what it cost him, and what it would have kept costing him if he hadn't. This is what I know. She made tea. She always makes tea. It is the ritual she brings to every domestic moment, the particular formality of a woman who believes that the right environment produces the right conversation, and he had sat at her kitchen table enough times in his life to understand that the tea was also a way of buying time before the thing that had to be said. He let her make the tea. He let her settle. Then he said, "Oma, you went to a gallery 2 years ago. You saw portraits on the wall and you cried. You told Mrs. Kim the next day that you'd never seen anyone handle light like that. You told 3 friends that week. Do you remember?" She looked at him. She nodded. "That was Naomi," he said. "You already know that. But here's what you don't let yourself know. The woman who made you cry with her art is the same woman you tell me isn't practical for this family. You separated them in your head. The artist you admire and the woman you reject. But they're the same person. They were always the same person." She was quiet. He looked at her the way he has looked at things his whole life, steady and measured, taking everything in before he speaks. Except this time, he had already decided what he was going to say, and the measuring was not hesitation. It was clarity. "I'm not asking you to change overnight," he said. "I'm telling you what's true. You already loved her work. The only thing that changed is that she loves me. If that makes her less worthy in your eyes, then you're not protecting this family. You're the one breaking it." She did not speak. He did not give her an ultimatum. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice, or bring the argument into the territory where she could find something to fight against. He just said what was true, plainly, in his own kitchen, at his own mother's table, for the first time in his life, because he had been avoiding it since before he understood what avoidance was, and because the only person who had ever made him understand the cost of that avoidance was the woman he had just left standing in the middle of her apartment. Then he stood up. He didn't wait for her to answer. He said what he came to say, and he left, because the words were in her kitchen now, and they didn't need him there to stay. I was at my studio the next morning when I heard the knock. It was early. early enough that the light was still doing the particular flat, pale thing it does in December before the sun finds its angle. I'd been editing from the night before, the Choi portraits, doing the final pass before I sent the files. The knock at the studio door. I opened it. Junho was standing there. Sola was beside him, holding his hand, wearing her purple coat with the wooden buttons that she refuses to let me replace, even though they are slowly detaching one by one. She had her small backpack on. She looked up at me and said, "Mommy," and walked directly inside as if she'd been expected, which is a thing Sola does, move through the world as if it has been arranged for her arrival. Junho did not move yet. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like a man who had driven to his mother's house and said the hardest thing he'd ever said, and then spent the rest of the night sitting with what that cost him. There was something in his face that I hadn't seen before. Not performance, not the careful, measured presentation he brought to difficult moments. Just him. Tired and present, and not going anywhere. "I talked to her," he said. I stood in the doorway. In the studio behind me, Sola had already found the low shelf where I kept a set of wooden animals she was allowed to play with during long shoots, and I could hear her arranging them, the small sounds of a child who has found her activity and is settled. "What did you say?" I asked. He looked at me. He told me about the kitchen, the tea, the gallery and the 3 friends, and the specific word he had used. They were always the same person. He told me what his mother's face had done when he said it. He told me he had not waited for her to answer. He said, "I reminded her that she already loved you, before any of this." Silence. I looked at him standing in my doorway in the early December light, exhausted, his hands not in his pockets for once, but open at his sides, and I thought about the car in the rain, and the kitchen table with the coffee, and his voice saying, "I love you," like a fact he'd just noticed. I thought about the silence at the dinner tables, and my voice naming it out loud, and the months of carrying the weight of both our patterns colliding. He had gone. He had not retreated this time. He had done the opposite of everything his whole life had trained him to do. And then he had come back. "You stayed," I said. Something moved across his face. Relief and exhaustion and something else. Something that didn't have a quick word. The thing that lives in the face of a person who has finally done the right thing and knows it. "I stayed," he said. I stepped back from the doorway. He came in. Behind me, Sola was lining up the wooden animals along the edge of the shelf with serious attention. The elephant first, then the giraffe, then something that was either a dog or a small bear. She had never been entirely clear on that one. She looked up once, to verify we were both there, and then went back to her arrangements. The animals were all in a row. Nobody at the edge, nobody missing. I didn't say anything else about what had been said in the kitchen, or about what would come next with his mother, or about the weeks ahead. There would be time for all of it. The conversation was not finished. The arc was not resolved. The wall his mother had built between the artist she admired and the woman she rejected was still standing, just cracked now, just beginning to let the light in. But he was here. He had stayed. That was enough to start from. Weeks passed. December moved through the studio windows in shifts of light. I edited. I booked. I kept showing up the way I always had. Junho kept showing up too. Present in the way he hadn't always been, picking Sola up on Tuesdays, bringing food without announcing it, not making speeches about any of it. Just here. We didn't talk about his mother much. There was an understanding between us that the conversation in her kitchen had planted something, and what happened to it wasn't something we could hurry. The words were in her kitchen now. They were doing what true things do when you can't argue them away. I knew that. I let it work. And then, one morning in January, my studio door opened and she walked in. No call ahead, no warning. Park Yoon-suk in a grey coat, handbag held in both hands the way she held things when she was working to look composed. Alone, she stood in the middle of the studio floor and looked at me across 15 feet of space, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, "I would like you to photograph me." I waited. "I want to see," she said, "how you see me." Her voice was controlled. But underneath the control something was moving. The specific effort of a woman who has decided to do something that terrifies her and has committed to not showing the terror. I knew what that looked like. I've sat in front of enough people who were afraid to be seen. "Sit down," I said. The chair by the window. She sat. The January light was clean and cold and honest. I didn't adjust anything. I didn't set up extra lights or soften the source or change the angle. I got my camera and I shot what was there. A woman in her late 60s, proud, afraid, holding on. The hand stayed on the handbag, and the hands told more truth than the face. The face was performance, even now, but the hands were tired. She was beautiful. She was also something that might have been shame, working its way up through the layers. I photographed all of it. I did not soften the lines around her eyes. I did not position her to look younger or more rested than she was. I did not punish her either. I did not chase the unflattering angle or look for the shot that would make her small. Professor Williams taught me to see what was actually there, to be a fair witness to whoever sat in front of my lens. I was a fair witness. That is everything I know how to be. When I was done, I turned the camera and showed her the screen. She looked at it for a long time. Then she cried. Not loudly, not performed, just tears, real and quiet, running down her face while her expression stayed almost still. She kept looking at the image. She didn't look away from herself. I didn't say anything. I let her look. Nobody had ever shown her herself without the performance. I understood that watching her face. The portrait was honest, and honest was the one thing she hadn't been prepared for. Not cruelty, not flattery, just the truth that a trained eye could see. And the truth was, a woman who had built a wall between two things that were always the same thing, and had kept it standing for 2 years, and was finally looking at the cost of it. She cried because it was true. I had not made her afraid. I had just shown her what was already there. The woman who had refused to see me was finally being seen by the very person she had spent 2 years refusing to look at. And my eye had been the same eye it always was. Honest, trained, careful. The same eye that had moved her at the gallery in Bethesda. It had always been the same eye. That was the whole of it. Halmony? Sola's voice. She had come in from the back corner where I kept her art supplies, holding a piece of paper, crayon, slightly crumpled from being in her backpack. She walked straight to Yunsuk the way Sola walks everywhere, like the room has been arranged for her arrival. I made this for you, she said. Yunsuk's hands let go of the handbag. She took the drawing. Sola pointed at each figure. That's Mommy. That's Daddy. That's me. That's Halmony. Everyone the same size. Everyone in the center. No one at the edge. Yunsuk looked at the drawing, then at Sola, then at me. I know what her face did. It opened. The same thing it had done at the gallery in Bethesda, standing in front of the portrait of the grandmother and the newborn grandchild. The performance dropped, and the part of her that was capable of being genuinely moved was just there, visible for anyone looking. She said something quiet to Sola in Korean. Sola beamed and went back to her corner. Yunsuk sat with the drawing in her lap a while longer. I sat down at my editing station and let her have the time. When she stood to go, she looked at me once more. She didn't say she was wrong. She didn't apologize. She was not built for those gestures, and I did not need them. She said thank you. Then she walked out. That evening I called my mother. Denise Carter answered on the second ring. I told her things were getting better. Told her about the studio visit, the photograph, Sola, and the drawing. I didn't editorialize. She listened all the way through. Good, she said. Your father's been asking about you. Come eat Sunday. That was it. No wisdom line. No lesson wrapped in a saying. Just my mother, glad her daughter was okay, already moving toward the practical matter of Sunday dinner. Tell him I'll be there, I said. Bring Sola. He wants to see Sola. I smiled at my phone in the dark. My parents, still in PG County, still steady. The kind of people who show love through presence, not performance. I already knew I came from good people. I always knew that. 2 days later, Junho showed me his phone. His mother had posted to her social media that curated account she kept for family events and holidays. She had posted my studio page, tagged Naomi Carter Portraits. She had written 2 words, my daughter-in-law. I read it twice. No caption, no context, no long explanation. Just the fact stated plainly, in a place where her friends could see it. First time she had ever claimed me publicly. First time in 2 years. Through the gallery and the dinners and the whitening cream gifts and the edge of every family photo, she had never once put my name next to that word in a room where anyone could see it. She had now. Junho watched my face. My father saw it, he said. He called me, didn't say much. Just that he saw it, and he was glad. Mr. Park. Genuinely neutral for as long as I'd known him. A man who let his wife run the family, and had been doing it his whole life. He had seen the post and picked up the phone. That was as close to approval as he got, probably. It was enough. The wall was not down. She was still herself, still learning what a crack in something you've built for decades actually means. But she had done the one thing she had never done. In public, without explaining herself. Something had shifted. Not everything, not permanently, but something real, something that would not shift back. The following Sunday I went to my parents' house with Junho and Sola. My mother made macaroni. Sola ate 3 servings and announced this to everyone. My father asked Junho careful questions about urban planning, and Junho answered them with genuine interest. And my mother watched the whole thing from across the table with the expression of a woman who is taking notes. Loud, ordinary, comfortable, the way Sunday should be. Toward the end of the evening, I got my camera from the bag I always carry, set it on the bookshelf across from the couch. My parents settled on the couch, Junho beside me, Sola already climbing up between everyone, making herself at home. I framed the shot. Then I did something I almost never do. I set the timer, 10 seconds. I pressed the button, and I walked into the frame and I sat down between Junho and my mother, and Sola climbed into my lap. And I looked at the camera. The light was wrong. The angle wasn't what I would have chosen. My mother was turned slightly, mid-sentence. Junho had Sola's elbow in his ribs. My father was looking just to the left of the lens. The shutter fired. Nobody asked anyone to step out. I looked at the photo after, on the screen in the low evening light. Everyone still talking around me. It wasn't the best photo I've ever taken, but it was the first one where I was in it. Not the woman behind the lens. Not the professional with her eye to the viewfinder. Not the person who documents everyone else's families, always careful to get every face in the frame. Always the one making sure everyone else is seen. In this one, I was in the frame. It wasn't the best photo I've ever taken, but it was the first one where I was in it.